guys, what's going on? It's Broken Nose Vlogs here, and in my hands, in front of me, is an entire desktop computer. Yes, you heard that right. This is an entire desktop computer. It has a CPU that can actually be removed. It is not soldered onto the board. It also has a GTX 960 in it. Now, granted, you cannot remove said GTX 960, but it is supposedly a desktop variant of that card. It even has expandable storage and expandable RAM. Granted, it is not your standard size RAM. It actually uses SODIMM for laptops. What is this? Well, this is my Alienware Alpha R2. Now, I've done quite a few videos on this particular computer over the course of a few years. The most recent one I did in 2024 actually was discussing how I felt like this computer may not be cutting it anymore. Well, I read some comments on that video, and by the way, it is not on this channel, it is on my gaming channel. It's before I split these videos and channels apart. But I read through the comments, and I did see some things saying that the computer might be overheating. It could benefit from a better power supply, or even replacing the CPU inside of it with a better CPU. For those of you that haven't watched my videos on this particular computer, this has an i7 6700T variant inside of it, which is a 35 watt variant of the i7 6700. Has a GTX 960 that's basically mounted on the board, and then it has the option for an M.2, a 2.5 SSD, and it has expandable RAM. The downside is you only get one RAM slot, which means you can only expand up to about 16 gigabytes, and it is locked to 2133, the JEDEC standard. It is not overclockable as far as I can tell. Other issues with this particular computer right now is you officially can't update to Windows 11. Now, I have been told that there are workarounds, and I have investigated these workarounds. It is doable. Is it something I'm going to run out and do? Probably not. At least not yet. Because I'm still torn on if I want to maybe install Linux on this computer. But the last time I talked about this particular computer in 2024, I mentioned about how poorly it was performing compared to previous videos that I have made on it. I kind of took it to heart and decided to tear down the Alienware one last time just to see if there was any serious issues that I may have not noticed, or something had happened in the time that I had been using it. Lo and behold, very much like the laptop, the thermal paste that I had used on the Alpha was pumped out. So it was not making as good a contact with the heat sinks, and I think that was probably affecting the performance, and it was probably overheating because of that. So while I had this computer taken apart, I repasted it with Thermal Grizzly Duronaut, which is a pretty good thermal paste that should resist pump out. I also decided to add a small heatsink onto the M.2 drive. I've been told that sometimes that M.2 drive gets pretty hot because there's no ventilation over it other than the fans, which pick up and move air basically over the GPU and the CPU heatsink blocks. So there is limited airflow, but I thought maybe adding a heatsink would help as well. So after that, I decided to put it all back together and just, run some tests on it and see if I could get any better performance out of it. Now, before we get on to some of the performance and other enhancements that I did, another thing I thought about was maybe the airflow of this particular unit. There's not a lot of it as far as I can tell. I believe it takes in air from the bottom, and that's about it. So I decided to use a cardboard tray to sort of like suspend the computer up in the air a little bit, so maybe it's not right on a shelf or a desk sucking in air at a limited rate, hoping that maybe that would improve it. Honestly, my next step after this is maybe to Dremel out a square on the top of the case and actually add like a USB cooling fan on the top of it, like a 120 millimeter fan that I could just bolt right onto the top. So that sort of little perch that I had placed the Alienware on also helped bring in fresh air through the cooling system, and I also believe that the heatsink that I put on the SSD M.2 helped as well. I didn't see a huge uplift in performance yet, but I did notice one thing. My temperatures were much better than they used to be. The CPU, for example, would not crack mid-70s, even under full load, just being used non-stop for either like Cinebench or some sort of like real CPU intensive task. The CPU was not cracking like, let's say, 75 Celsius, which for a little box like this is pretty good. The GPU was also not nearly as hot as it was before, but I would still say it was warm. It's in the 80s. But then came an idea. I downloaded MSI Afterburner onto this computer. Now, I had done this in the past, and at the time, a lot of the features weren't available, so I didn't think it would actually work with this computer. Well, I was wrong. Basically, the way the GTX 960 is set up inside of this particular computer, you don't get access to things like voltage or power at all, which I've been told the 960 didn't have a lot of power options to start with, but it's basically entirely disabled inside of this card. You also don't get any fan control because theoretically there is not a fan that can be controlled by the GPU. There is no fan plugged into essentially a pinout on the GPU because it doesn't exist. The two blower fans that are installed on this computer are handled a different way, which basically they have two settings. They have low and high, so once it passes the threshold, it goes into high. You could still overclock it, and I decided to do that. So I overclocked the core by 175 megahertz, and I overclocked the RAM, the VRAM, by 675 megahertz. And I decided to run some tests on the Alpha to see how it would do, and I did it in 1080p still. I did not bump it down to 720p. I decided, no, we're going to keep it at 1080p, and we'll see what we can get. So I'll go ahead and I'll actually post the baseline scores that I got first. Now, these scores are fairly similar to the scores the Alpha was hitting when I had this computer before I did any of the thermal paste work and stuff like that. But the computer was running cooler than it was previously, so I think that did help out a bit, and it also may have given me more headroom. I went ahead and I applied the overclocks, and I did some testing to make sure they were stable, and then I ran some of the 3D Marks benchmarks in the overclocked mode. And I was actually fairly surprised. I'll go ahead and I'll show you these scores really quick. But as you can see from the scores, and maybe even the little icons down below, the scores after the overclock were more than 10% better than they were previously with the baseline scores. So I think the saving grace to keep this little guy running and relevant is obviously overclocking the computer, which I didn't think of doing because I just didn't think this little thing could handle it. I thought I was kind of at the limits of what this computer could put out. But with a moderate overclock on the GPU, it did perform pretty well. Now, the only other issue with this computer is the CPU. We are kind of stuck in the 6000 era of Intel CPUs. I believe some people have tried the 7000 because it's got the same pinout, but the BIOS inside of here won't recognize 7000 series CPUs, or at least that's what I've been told. But I am still thinking about maybe getting a standard 65 watt i7 6700 and seeing if that would improve performance at all. But I will say that I'm fairly impressed with the performance that I got out of this overclock for the Alpha here. Is it better than the old MSI laptop that I used to have? Not quite. But that also being said, it the laptop is using a mobile version of a GTX 1650 4GB. So it's a few generations newer compared to the GTX 960 here. But I did notice I've had a few comments saying like, no, this thing can still game at 1080p. And after seeing what it did performance-wise in some of these 3D Mark tests, especially with the overclock, I'm inclined to agree. I just don't think you're going to be getting, you know, some real wild numbers when it comes to, especially current era games. You know, one of the limiting factors of this particular computer is the fact that it only has like 4 gigabytes of VRAM. Now, if you get an amplifier, which will plug into the back of the Alienware, you could actually run other you could run other GPUs with this computer. Problem is every Alienware amplifier that I've found so far doesn't come with a cable, so it's basically useless, other than if you want to, I guess, display it. But that's like my biggest drawback right now, is I don't have the ability to find an amplifier that's complete that would plug into my computer here. I will say that I do think this thing could still probably game in the 1080p world. You would just probably have to make some you know, slight adjustments with your settings in the game, and then also maybe, you know, focus on like an overclock. As far as the results go, by the way, on the 3D Mark stuff, I'm top 15 in the 4 benchmarks that I did run, because I didn't bother installing the full version. And then I believe I'm actually top 1 in the Steel Nomad Lite for the pairing of a 6700T and a GTX 960. I think the other thing that I probably may have messed up with in my previous video on the 2024 review of this computer is I did use in-game recording software, and then I was also using the statistics server to show frame rates, and I think that was probably taxing the system a little bit more as well, and probably affecting gameplay, because after using it without any of those plugins or recordings or anything like that, and just watching it play out on the TV, things seemed pretty smooth for a computer of this era. I think that may have influenced the results a little bit in the 2024 video as well. So, if you still have an Alienware Alpha R2, overclock the GPU a little bit, and you can still probably play games maybe at slightly reduced settings at 1080p, but it should be just fine. I wouldn't throw this thing away yet or relegate it to the closet. I'm going to keep my Alpha R2 up and running as either just a home theater PC in the front room, or hopefully a DDR machine in the near future if I can get a dance pad. But after reading the comments in my 2024 video, I will say I feel like I was a little bit too hard on the Alienware last year, and I think I should have done some more sort of investigation into what could make this computer better, or if I could overclock it and things like that, which I have done now in 2025. And to be honest, I'm gonna, like I said, I'm gonna keep using this computer. If you remember, I had a pink PC that was a budget computer that I had built. I actually sold that unit. It's no longer with me. So right now I just have my desktop, my laptop, and then this is taking the place of what the pink budget PC was doing, which was a sort of home theater slash sort of like casual game system in the front room. But yeah, no, I take back all the mean and hurtful things I've said last year about the Alienware Alpha R2. It still works. I do think it would be cool if I could get a hold of an R1 just to see how it does compared to an R2. I do have a handful of things I'm also looking at that are even older than an R1 that I would like to build just to see how they would do, because I still have spare parts laying around, and building computers is kind of just a hobby. Just the building part is kind of fun for me. So maybe we can touch on that later. But I did kind of want to make this video and talk about the Alienware Alpha R2 one more time in 2025. Maybe the last time for a while, but like I said, the TLDR here is I think I may have judged it a little too harshly last year in 2024 after doing a slight overclock and sort of just tweaking a few settings and repasting it with a better quality thermal paste. I think it's fine still. I think it does okay. Is it the best thing out there? No. Does my MSI laptop, which no longer functions, technically beat it? Yes. But unlike the MSI laptop, this Alpha R2 is still, running strong, where the laptop won't boot without hitting 97 Celsius. So yeah, just kind of wanted to go over this and just say, hey, if you have one of these, or if you're still looking at one of these, they might be useful. I wouldn't pay a whole lot for them at this time, especially if you're not too competent with sort of like modding Windows 11 to actually install on here, because you otherwise are stuck with Windows 10 due to the fact that it is a 6th gen Intel inside of there. I'm going to keep using it. But yeah, I really just kind of wanted to make this video to sort of mention that I think I may have made an oopsie in my last year's video about talking about the Alienware Alpha R2. But yeah, so hopefully this will be the last that we see of it for a little while. Anyways, this video's gone on for way longer than I really anticipated it to. Thank you guys for watching. I hope I will catch you guys in another video soon. But until then, take it easy. Bye-bye.